When it comes to using AI in construction, Claude leaped ahead with its ability to use Cowork, so we can actually connect our folders to the AI so we can get around those annoying upload limits. This is particularly important for construction because we're dealing with drawings, which are very large. We have that are connected to specifications, that are connected to contracts, subcontractor quotes, and so on. But now with ChatGPT Work, we can easily connect our folders to our AI in a way that is simple to use, similar to Cowork. Now, you've been able to do this in the past with Codex, but this provides an interface or a harness which is much more similar to Cowork and much easier to use. So today, what I'm going to show you is how to set that up properly for a construction project, how to think in projects rather than pointing it at your whole business, how to give it the context it needs in an efficient way so you get better outputs, how to connect to your other software, and how to schedule work so it runs without you sitting there. If you have not used the ChatGPT desktop app before, that is where ChatGPT Work lives, or at least the version that's most useful to us. I did a longer video on the setup side that I'll leave down in the comments if that is something you want to look at first. But in this instance, we're going to be diving deep into ChatGPT Work. And the one other thing that's worth noticing is I covered what skills are in that video also. And so if you're not quite familiar with a skill is, essentially it's just a set of instructions you upload once for a certain task that you do over and over again. And this capability has come to ChatGPT Work, which I think is really, really important. So again, if that's something you're confused with, then the details on that is in the other longer video as well. But with that said, let's jump straight into ChatGPT Work. Now, to start using ChatGPT Work, what we need to do is actually get it set up in a folder. And the best way to do that in terms of when you're working for a construction company, whether you're a project manager, an estimator, or something along those lines, is to think in projects. So the best place to start is an example of what may be a small electrical firm's system. So you can see they might have administrator and business development, health and safety, quality, environmental, plant and fleet. I'm sure they have some tendering stuff, much more. Generally, depending on the size of the business, if we were to connect Cowork to everything, it would be just too much and it wouldn't be focused enough. And when we ask a question on, say, like what are the liquidated damages of a project, it would potentially get confused between different projects, assuming you're running multiple of them. You probably have an archive of them as well. So the best way to connect things is to actually go in and think at a project level. So in this instance, I just have a demo folder with one project in here. And within that, I have everything associated with that project as well. And I'll touch on that more soon. But what that now means is I want to connect ChatGPT Work to all of this so that when I'm doing work or asking questions or whatever it may be on this project, it will be able to pull the answer out of any one of these documents when I come to ask it. So that's how to think in projects. If you run 2 or 3 or 4 projects at a time, then you'll likely have 2, 3 or 4 projects running in here. You can also set up some personal projects, like I have my own operating system, which understands a lot more about me and my business and my content and that side of things. So that's an aside to the project work that I do. So thinking in projects is really important. Now, how do we get a new project set up? So very simply, you can go new task. And at this point, it's connected to my existing project. So I can go don't work in a project. And this is for one-off tasks where you may upload the context that you need for it to create the output, but then it won't be used in the future. So what we actually want to do is choose a project to work from, and that's going to appear on the side here. So you can see if I click on them, they'll all roll up and get rid of the context from there, and I can just open the one I want to work within at any one time. So to do that, and the way I've attached this project, which is the one we're just looking at, is I've gone choose project, new project, use an existing folder. I click that, and then I select the folder. Now, the most important thing is that this folder must be local on your computer, meaning that it's either in your C drive, from Windows, or on your desktop or your document side as well if you're on the Mac. Now to connect it, very simple. You just click use an existing folder, you select the folder, you go open, and you're good to go. And that's the same for all of them. Then I'm going to touch on how to set up your folder in just a second. But very briefly, I want to talk about how to do this because most of us are running on either Google Drive or SharePoint, and having duplicates of that can be annoying. So there's two ways to approach this. The first is the safer way, and something that you probably should be doing if you haven't worked with something like Claude Cowork or ChatGPT Work before, and that is creating a duplicate of the folder on your desktop so that when you go ahead and use ChatGPT within there, the work that it changes is not the live work that's inside your SharePoint. That means that you can give ChatGPT free run and not need to be worried about it deleting something permanently or editing a document that you don't want it to edit or you're not aware that it has edited, because that is when issues arise, and go from there. However, it is possible to run inside of SharePoint if that is something that makes sense for you. And obviously that does mean giving ChatGPT access to all of the files within that folder, and then it can go ahead and make changes and edits to that. So it's important you keep in touch with what's going on there and have some confidence and understanding of how it is running and working. And if you want to do that, the way that is done is if we come across to here, this is on my desktop, so there is no issues with this one. But if I was to go to my OneDrive, I click on my OneDrive, I can right click and go always keep on this device, or if it's Google Drive, it'll be make available offline, or one of those. That creates a second copy essentially for this on my device and allows ChatGPT Work to actually be able to connect to it. So I've done a test on this. Now Windows is a little bit more funny, and there are a couple more bugs around that, which I've come across in the community. But for example, this one here is actually a OneDrive file, a OneDrive folder that I've connected, and I've gone through and confirmed that it can actually read it by following that strategy. But there is some nuance to that as well. And so it is worth noting and being careful of also. So I'll touch on what more you can do with that, given you've got everything connected and your team can also see the documents and that you're producing. So that is how to get a project set up. You'll have a number of these. You can click the three dots here and pin projects you use a lot. You can remove them. You can delete tasks. And that's where you can operate them out of there. But what we actually want is for ChatGPT to be able to find what it needs easily, and also on every chat we have, at least have a base understanding of what it is that is involved with the project, what are the people that are involved with the project, what are the drawings, all that sort of stuff. We want it to be able to access easily so that when we're asking questions, we can get reliable answers, we can get them quickly, and we don't want to be burning a lot of usage getting simple questions. And to do that, it's all about setting up the project folder correctly. So as it currently stands, ignoring the AI context folder because I've just added that in, as well as the agents.md, there's a ton of documents within inside of here that are all in Word, Excel, and PDF, which, yes, ChatGPT can read, but is not as efficient as a document type called a markdown or a .md, which is very simply the cleanest and easiest way for an LLM to ingest context and be able to pull that in regularly. Now, what ChatGPT Work does is every time we're inside this folder here, if there's a file called this agents.md, it will read that every single time. And that allows us to do a lot of cool things when it comes to helping it find the context it needs to be able to do the work that we want. So what we have in the community is a skill called the project indexer skill. And what that does is essentially go through all of the documents inside a project folder and create a agents.md if it's on ChatGPT, or a Claude.md if you're working within Cowork. Now, on top of that, it creates what we call a 0.ai context folder, which then has more markdown files with more information on other things like what's in the drawing and what the project's all about, as well as some business context. So along with project context, there's going to be a lot of business information that is really, really useful for your LLM to have access to as you're going through and creating, completing your work in here. And that business context may not live within that markdown file. It may be an external database or software that it calls to find them. So an example of this is if you're doing a contract review and your business has a set of terms that they would deem acceptable, and that set of terms could live in a structured database, say in Supabase. And so the business context will say the standard conditions that are acceptable live inside of Supabase. So should the LLM ever come across a time when it needs that, it knows it needs to go and look at Supabase to actually have that information pulled out to go through, and so it could complete the job better, essentially. So that's what the project index has done, and it's created these items within inside our folder here. Here's that agents.md that I was talking about before. So you can see here, as I've just quickly modified it for ChatGPT, now it's out, that it's pointing towards the Claude.md, the project.md, and the drawings.md in the AI context folder. And before working the project, to read through all of those to get an understanding of it. Now, generally, what you would do is I will change it so that the agents.md has all the information that it needs within there and can go and look externally. But for now, this works. And so now we can have a look at what the Claude.md entails. And this is where we actually start to get a really good understanding of what the project's about and where to go and find things. And you can see here, it's mapped the entire folder structure to what's actually in there, so that if we're asking a question on a site diary from a certain date, it knows that it's going to be contained within the site records section. And you can see it's even got some more details on where to find what that is typical, related context files and analysis and index, etc. Now, if we look at the project.md, this has some core things about the project. So those common questions that come up or context that is useful to know when going through and completing work within it. So for example, here it's got the commencement of the project, it's got the practical completion, some insurance stuff, delay notices that need to be done in 10 working days, all that sort of stuff, the scope, and just some core things that it needs. And with the reason being is that if it can't find the answer in here, it then knows where to go to find the answer, and then it can look at the original document and spend that usage in effect going through, reading and understand that. But what this does, it gives it a great foundation to be able to start from. So every time you use the ChatGPT Work in this project here, it already has a good understanding of what's going on. The last one, and I haven't run a drawing analyzer yet, so this is just an overview, but it's gone through and indexed all the sheets and what's on there as well. And what I would normally do now is run what we call the drawing analyzer, which goes through and splits out every single sheet and creates a markdown file for each one of those so that it can pull context from the drawings without having to look at them every time. And that just makes it much more efficient because it'll only look at the actual drawing when it absolutely needs to. So just so you can see, that's what this folder is here. So Claude.md, there's a drawings.md and our project.md, and the remainder stays the same. And just before we move on, the reason that is important is because that last year it was prompt engineering. That was the big thing about getting more out of these LLMs on being able to do more complex tasks. This year, with the power of the models, context engineering is a very important aspect to it, because if you give an LLM now, or one of the new models now, a poor prompt, but really good context, it will figure out what you actually want reasonably well. Whereas if we give a model a really good process to follow, it's a really good prompt, but not great context, then what we'll find is the output of that will likely be worse than the one that actually has the better context behind it. And then just before I finish off on this context, I briefly mentioned the business context, and that's something that would live in your AI context folder as well, we have a skill in the community that helps you set that up so that so that ChatGPT knows where to go to find the information that's relevant for its task. It understands what your business is, core philosophies, team members, whatever it may be, can be contained within that. And it can take that through to every project. So every one of your projects will now have an AI context folder, and it will also have the business context within that as well, which is enough to keep it going. Now, just quickly, I want to run through our community contract to OS. So the link to check that out is down in the description. And here we have some foundational stuff on how to approach AI in construction and the different models, whether it be Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, etc. Then we have over 95 different workflows that you can go through, install, and download and use and modify to your own business in the own way that you work, as well as how we see everything come together in what we would call our operating system and building that out for your business and your projects. And we also have a bit of one-on-one coaching calls you can jump on to get your questions answered, with our entire goal to be making sure you get genuinely useful results from AI as quickly as possible, and they actually help you run your business and your projects better. Now, I'd love to see you in there, and the link for that is just down in the description. Cool. So now let's move on to connectors and actually being able to connect, or plugins is probably the better word to use when it comes to ChatGPT Work, so that we can connect to outside software. Now, to do that, I'm going to use the example of Supabase. And Supabase is the tool that we've set up a structured database template on for the community. So if I come to plugins here, you can see as it loads up, there'll be a ton of different plugins that we can connect to and use. And I've already got a few connected in terms of documents, PDFs, Gmail, Canva, etc. But what I'm going to search for is the one that I want. And this will be the same for any of them. So I actually want to connect Supabase, which is this one here. So I'm going to click install and it will pop up. And then essentially it's giving me an overview of what I'm about to do. So I'm going to go continue to Supabase, where it's popped up on my browser for me to log in. So I'm just going to go and log into my account here to essentially authorize the connection and go from there. And while you're on that page, it does give you the permissions that you're essentially allowing to it. So there's things called read and write. So reading is pulling information from the tool in, so context essentially. And writing is where ChatGPT can write back to it. So Supabase is a database. That means that if I'm giving it write access, it is able to then go ahead and write to the database, which is important to know to make sure you understand what is actually going on behind the scenes there. So I've just hit authorize on that. It's loading through and it should come through now as connected. So now I can pull through information from Supabase into my ChatGPT, which is extremely important when it comes to looking at workflows that we'll get on very shortly. And then if we come down here, we can search for Supabase. And now you can see that there's no install, it says connect. Now I can go manage. And this is where you can see like the skills that it has come with it too, because it's a plugin. So it has skills. I can reconnect it there. And I can try it and go through like that. So that is plugins. And if you want to add other ones, you can. So for example, SharePoint is another one that is a common one to connect to as well. Same process, you're going in and authorizing. It will show you what you can and can't do. So that's plugins. It's important that when we're building a skill or modifying a skill, that if we're calling information from, say, Supabase, for example, that we specify that in the skill and tell it where it is and what it is to get. And in the skills we build in the community, for example, with Supabase, there's what's called the schema, which is the layout of the database that knows what to query to pull in the information that it gets to. And the way that is stored in a skill is if we come in here to skills and we go to my personal one and we look, for example, procurement register should have it. You can see that it goes through the steps that it has, and there's a reference files in here as well. So what you can do is put in a reference file that matches the schema so that when Claude queries it, it knows exactly what it needs to go away and search to pull out the right information. So just some other things to keep in mind as you go through and are using these and setting them up for yourselves. It's very much a case of telling it where it can go to go and get the right context. So that is that. Now, moving on to another one, which is a great place for construction, is what are called scheduled tasks. So scheduled tasks are exactly what they sound. They're tasks that run on a schedule. So a good example of that is if you keep a correspondence log that each day you may have ChatGPT go through all of the emails for that day, categorize them, and have it update the register based on your parameters around that as well. It's a good example of scheduled tasks. The classic is the daily brief, where you can get a snapshot of your day ahead or what happened yesterday and go through from there. Now, the way I like to run scheduled tasks is to essentially create a skill for the task that I want to schedule. And what that means is that I can very simply inside the scheduled task say run, set, and then name of skill, and it will run that periodically as it goes through. But before I do that, I can test it manually 3 or 4 times. I can iterate on it and make sure it's working how I want it before I leave it as a scheduled task to go away and run essentially on its own. So to set up a scheduled task, it's very simple. You come up into scheduled here. You can either hit create, which will take you to create with ChatGPT. Will then ask you some questions and you can create it that way. I actually prefer to create them manually because I use skills. So I'm going to go create, then hit the down arrow here, set up manually. And then very simply, it's setting up the scheduled task. So for example, if I wanted to run the project indexer, say once a week to keep my markdown files up to date with new information that comes into a project, I will just go run and then go at project indexer. That makes it super easy and it can run in a new task. And the project that I want it to run in, the one we're just working on, I don't really need solve for that. I'm just going to go Terra, reasoning, I only need medium, and repeat. Let's go weekly, Sunday at 9 a.m. Why not? And then very easy, go to add a title. Don't forget your title. So project indexer run and hit create scheduled task. Now I have that. It's saying its next run is in 4 days and it will go ahead and do that. You can see the active sticker in here. Now we've got active paused, which I don't have any on. So that's a scheduled task. Now that is good to go. Cool. And then the next thing I want to show is this area called sites. So this is essentially where you can create your own website basically. And what they are is either a great way to get across ideas and meetings and that, or I like to use them for registers. So you can get a visual of a register that may be kept inside of an Excel document. Just gives it a nice interface. And you can see here, all I've done to run this inside of the project folder here is build a website. And on the RFI register for the pro electrical job, team members can add an RFI, and I've given it some parameters around what they can and can't do within that, like attaching photos and filter by status, and then require people to sign in with our workspace account as well, if that is necessary. You can go open, and you can open in ChatGPT here, which this is essentially the browser. So you can run different tabs, like you can go here and the browser tab in there. You're essentially in Google, you can enter a URL and view it, do research. But here, this is my one. You can see this is the URL that's created that I could share with the team. And I need to continue with my ChatGPT account to be able to access the site that I've created, because that was what I specified inside of the thing. So I'm just going to log in there now. And now I'm logged into that site that I've created, the website, and you can see this has built essentially a viewer for the RFI that is on in an Excel document, and it's gone through and created the open, answered, closed areas for the RFI as well. I can add an RFI and go through on that. So a cool way to be able to share information. And I really like the combination of a front end like this, whether it's built on ChatGPT sites or through Codex, tied back to a structured database, which is the truth behind everything. And then this is just a viewer. And then you can make simple edits and changes like adding an RFI or being able to change the status on certain things. It makes keeping a register much easier to keep up to date, combined with something like a structured task to keep it up to date. So I really like that. And that's actually a really cool use case you can share with the team. So I'm going to exit out of this now. And essentially that gives you the foundations for being able to work within ChatGPT Work. Now what it is building up your library of skills so that you can go through and complete your work within inside each project, having AI or ChatGPT help you along the way. And because each document gets saved inside of that folder, then that actually allows the context to grow over time, and you'll be able to use the output of one thing. So for example, your requirements register, and be able to use that in another workflow down the track. So you can continue to sort of stack workflows. Now, what we have in the community is we have a build out your own OS here, and we have our workflow section. So split out into the 11 categories. And then down the bottom is our Excel document here. So if we go across, you can see this is what you want to be building up and how you're going to get the most out of ChatGPT Work. So this is for pre-construction, split out into phases. This is the one we've got for the community, the way we see it. But every business has a different set of processes that they go through to essentially achieve said outcome. And so what you've got here is it broken down into different phases, and each phase has it broken into workflows. And every workflow has a skill about, and then what it does, and the in-skill assets, so what's actually in it, the inputs, outputs, what feeds it, what triggers it, and then what the human role actually is versus the AI role as well, and then any related skills and workflows for all of the ones that you have. And this is like your SOP for using AI essentially. And then when you're doing work inside of ChatGPT Work, it's in parallel to you. So you can use this as your guide. So, okay, I'm onboarding the project. I'm going to run the project indexer, the drawing analyzer. We're now going to go through the go, no-go decision. And again, this will have access to your business context in terms of the scoring criteria you have for your go, no-go and the template you use for that. So you'll invoke that skill, you'll call on that skill, it'll roll through and essentially can do the heavy lifting for you while you do all the review, the decisions, and the inputs that actually matter. And that goes right the way through the pre-construction process. And that is how you get the most out of ChatGPT Work. Now, I'm not going to touch on I'm not going to touch on ChatGPT Codex in here. I'll do that in a separate video. So I think for the majority of people, it's the foundations plus ChatGPT Work is where they're going to get the real benefits from using this. So thanks for watching, and the link to join the community is down in the description. I'd love to see you in there, and thanks for watching.